One of the things that we have to deal with is communication. And sometimes we think we're doing a good job of communicating, but really people are not hearing what we're saying. I remembered this incident that happened back when I was in pre-K. It was a little tiny one-school pre-K in Hannibal, Missouri. Our teacher was Mrs. Seeley. She was nice but strict. And it was the end of the day, and all of us were to get on our coats and our boots and our mittens. We're sitting on our little red benches when I looked over, and my best friend, Jill, who's got eyes as big as saucers, she was just sitting there. Just sitting there. Mrs. Seeley looked over and saw her sitting there, and she goes, Jill, get your boots on. And Jill simply looked at her and said, I can't get these boots on. So Mrs. Seeley goes over, drops to her knees, and she starts shoving and shoving and shoving, working up a sweat, and she finally gets one boot on, and then the other, she shoves and shoves and shoves, and she finally gets that boot on. She's like, Jill, these boots, they barely fit you. Jill looks at her and said, they're not my boots. Mrs. Seeley's face became pale. She dropped to her knees and she starts pulling and pulling and pulling, and she gets a boot off, pulls and pulls, finally gets the other boot off, holds the boots up to the class. She goes, all right, whose boots are these? Jill looks up at her and says, they're my brother's. Now I thought Mrs. Seeley was gonna cry. She drops back down to her knees, shoves, 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 shoves. When she finally stands up, she's like, Jill, where's your mittens? In the boots. As a leader, you gotta be listening and communicating clearly.